I never thought love could be measured in receipts, but that was how my journey with my daughter's wedding quietly began. From the moment she got engaged, I stepped into the role I had always played in her life: the provider, the protector, the silent supporter. I paid for everything, without hesitation: the venue she dreamed of, the designer dress she circled in glossy magazines, the flowers flown in from another city because local ones didn't feel special enough. Every payment felt like a small sacrifice wrapped in pride. I told myself this was my duty as a parent, that watching her walk down the aisle happy would be my reward. I dipped into my savings without complaint. Money I had set aside for my retirement, my health, my future. All of it slowly vanished, replaced by invoices and bank notifications. Friends warned me to slow down, to set limits, but I brushed them off. "She's my daughter," I said. "This is her once-in-a-lifetime moment." Late at night, when the house was quiet, I calculated numbers and felt the weight of fear creep in. But then I'd picture her smile and convince myself it was worth it. As the wedding grew closer, I noticed subtle changes. She became busier, more distant. Conversations turned shorter. Decisions were made without asking my opinion. I told myself this was normal. Wedding stress, excitement, new beginnings. I ignored the small sting in my chest every time I felt pushed slightly further away. After all, parents are supposed to step back eventually, right? I remembered the nights I stayed awake when she was sick as a child, the extra shifts I worked so she could attend a better school, the birthdays where I pretended I wasn't tired just to see her laugh. None of those sacrifices were ever recorded or repaid, and I never expected them to be. Love to me was always unconditional. Paying for her wedding felt like a continuation of that same promise I had silently made the day she was born, that I would always put her first. In my heart, I believed this gesture would bring us closer. I imagined sitting proudly in the front row, watching her begin a new chapter, knowing I had played a part in making it beautiful. I didn't need recognition, applause, or public thanks. All I wanted was to be there, to feel included, respected, remembered. What I didn't realize then was that sacrifice, when unnoticed, can slowly turn into invisibility. I was giving everything I had, assuming love would naturally flow back to me in return. I had no idea that the very act meant to honor our bond would become the moment that revealed how fragile it had quietly become. The words came casually, almost carelessly, as if she were talking about changing a dinner plan instead of rewriting our relationship. She told me there wasn't enough space at the venue, that the guest list was very tight, and that it would be easier if I just watched the wedding online. For a moment, I didn't understand what she meant. I waited for her to laugh, to say she was joking, to explain that of course I would be there. But she didn't. Her voice stayed calm, practical, detached. That was when the reality settled in, heavy and humiliating. I nodded on the phone, even though she couldn't see me. I said it was fine, that I understood. Parents learn early how to swallow their hurt so their children don't have to carry it. After the call ended, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the wall where family photos hung. I felt smaller than I had in years, as if I had been quietly erased from a moment I had helped create. The same hands that signed every check were suddenly considered unnecessary. The night before the wedding, the house felt unbearably silent. I set up my laptop on the dining table like she had suggested. I even tested the internet connection twice, afraid of missing a second of the ceremony. I ironed a shirt out of habit, then stopped, realizing there was nowhere to go. That realization cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't just about missing the wedding. It was about being placed outside of it, as if I were no longer part of her life's... When the live stream finally started, the screen flickered, and there she was, beautiful, radiant, surrounded by people who laughed and clapped and leaned close to her. I watched strangers hug my daughter, take photos beside her, sit in seats I had paid for. No one looked toward the camera. No one knew I was there, sitting alone, watching through a glass screen like an outsider peeking into someone else's joy. I wanted to turn it off.
I wanted to protect myself from the ache growing in my chest, but I couldn't. I had waited too long for this moment. Tears blurred my vision as the ceremony continued. I didn't cry loudly. There was no one to hear me. The humiliation wasn't public, but it was absolute. I realized then that rejection doesn't always come with shouting or cruelty. Sometimes it arrives politely, wrapped in excuses and convenience. When the stream ended, the screen went dark, and so did something inside me. I didn't call her, I didn't message, I didn't complain to anyone. I simply shut the laptop and sat in the quiet, trying to understand how love could give so much and still be left standing outside the door. The day after the wedding felt strangely ordinary, and that was what made it hurt even more. The sun came up like it always did, the street outside filled with familiar sounds, and yet something had shifted permanently. I went through my routine slowly, making tea I barely tasted, sitting in a chair that suddenly felt too large for me. I expected a message from her, maybe a thank you, maybe a photo, some small acknowledgement that I still mattered. My phone stayed silent. What she didn't see was the quiet cost of her decision. She didn't see how humiliation settles into the body, how it makes you question your worth long after the moment has passed. I replayed her words again and again, wondering when I had become optional. I asked myself if I had failed as a parent somehow, if my love had been too much, too easy, too unconditional. When sacrifice goes unnoticed, it doesn't explode, it erodes. It eats away at dignity, piece by piece. Family members began calling, talking excitedly about the wedding. They assumed I had been there. I didn't correct them. I let their words wash over me, each one another reminder of the role I had been quietly denied. Smiling through those conversations took more energy than I expected. Disrespect, I realized, doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides behind polite decisions and reasonable explanations, leaving you no space to defend your pain without sounding bitter. Meanwhile, the consequences of her choice were already unfolding in ways she couldn't yet understand. The absence of the one person who had always steadied her began to show. When small things went wrong, missing documents, delayed payments, unexpected problems, there was no one silently fixing them in the background. She had grown used to that safety net, to my presence solving problems before she even noticed them. Now, for the first time, she had to face those gaps herself. I didn't step in, not out of revenge, but out of exhaustion. There is a limit to how much a heart can give without breaking. For the first time, I chose silence over sacrifice. I needed space to understand what I had lost and what I was still willing to give. Love doesn't disappear instantly, but it does retreat when it's repeatedly pushed aside. As the day went on, I felt a strange mix of sadness and clarity. I saw how easily people can mistake kindness for weakness, how quickly devotion can be taken for granted. The money was gone, yes, but the deeper cost was emotional. Trust had cracked, respect had been bruised. Those things are far harder to repair than finances. By the evening, my phone finally rang. I didn't answer right away. I stared at the screen, realizing that the consequences of her actions were no longer abstract. They were real, heavy, and unavoidable, for both of us. And in that moment, I understood something painful but necessary. Love that is ignored will eventually demand to be felt, one way or another. It wasn't until later that evening, when the house had grown quiet and the shadows of the day stretched long across the walls, that the weight of the moment fully hit her. I had been sitting in the living room, staring at nothing in particular, letting the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing by anchor me in a reality that felt oddly surreal. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter and clinking glasses from the wedding, distant but sharp, reminding me that I had been there in every way that mattered financially, yet absent in every way that mattered emotionally. Somewhere in the middle of her celebrations, something had gone wrong. I could sense it without her even speaking. It was in the trembling tone of her first hesitant call, in the way she couldn't find the right words at first, as if the weight of her own decisions had left her speechless. This was the moment when realization began to take hold, not just that I had been excluded, but that my absence was profoundly felt. She had thought she could bypass the one person who had always been the foundation of her life, and now she was facing the consequences. The security of having me there, the quiet reassurance that everything would be okay, had been taken for granted, and now she was seeing the cracks in the world she assumed was stable.
The realization, I knew, was painful. It wasn't a matter of money or logistics. It was about love, respect, and the invisible scaffolding that supports someone throughout their life. By asking me to watch the wedding online, she had inadvertently tested the strength of our bond, and in doing so, she had exposed the fragility of her own sense of security. For her, the luxury and splendor of the wedding suddenly felt hollow without the presence of the person whose support had made it all possible. I could hear her breathing heavily over the phone, the kind of breath that carries the weight of regret before the words even come. The realization can hit like a wave, sudden and overwhelming, washing over someone who thought they had every detail under control. She realized that my sacrifices were not just financial, they were emotional, moral, foundational. My presence had always been a silent anchor, a stabilizing force she had never needed to notice until it was absent. And in that absence, the lesson became clear. Love, no matter how long it has been given freely, demands recognition. Not to be transactional, but to maintain the balance that allows both hearts to feel secure. Her realization was not just about me, it was about herself, about the way she had overlooked the quiet power of consistent, selfless support. In that moment, she understood the gap between intention and impact, between taking for granted and losing sight of what truly matters. The consequences of disrespect, of thoughtless exclusion, had arrived, and as she began to grasp the full extent of her actions, the first tremors of guilt and remorse set in. She was forced to confront the void left by my absence, the invisible cost of a parent's sacrifice overlooked, and the emotional reckoning that comes when someone finally sees what they've lost, too late. It was a painful but necessary awakening, one that reshaped how she would see both me and herself in the days to come. When her call finally came, the sound of her voice broke through the quiet in a way nothing else could. It wasn't loud or angry, it was fragile, trembling, weighted with an emotion that only comes from sudden regret. I could hear her crying softly over the line, the kind of tears that are soaked in realization, guilt, and helplessness all at once. There was a pause between her sobs, as if she didn't quite know where to begin, as if the enormity of what she had done and what she had missed was impossible to express in words. She told me how the day had unfolded without me, how she had looked around and felt something was missing, though she couldn't name it at first. How the celebrations, the flowers, the music, and the laughter all felt strangely hollow, as if there were a shadow where I should have been standing. I listened quietly, letting her voice fill the space around me. There was no anger in my own tone, no scolding, only the silence of someone who had already endured the hurt, who had felt the rejection, but still cared deeply. Her tears were not just about the wedding, they were about everything that had led to that moment, the subtle neglects, the unspoken dismissals, the casual assumptions that I would always be there regardless of how I was treated. They were a reckoning with the invisible work of love, the sacrifices that go unseen, and the quiet presence that shapes a person's life from behind the scenes. She had finally understood, too late perhaps, that love is not only measured in moments of celebration, but in consistent, unwavering support that often goes unnoticed until it is absent. I could feel the shift in her tone as she tried to apologize, to explain, to reach across the distance and bridge the gap her words and choices had created. But apologies, I realized, are never enough to erase the sting of exclusion or the years of being taken for granted. They are a first step,
a fragile attempt to rebuild trust that has been chipped away. Her tears, however, were sincere, and they were the first sign that she had truly grasped the weight of what she had done and what she had missed. I remained quiet, letting her process, letting her feel the consequences of her decisions in the rawest way possible. There is a kind of lesson that can only come through experiencing absence, the hollow space that opens up when someone who has always been there suddenly isn't. And now she was feeling it, finally, through her own emotions, not mine. By the end of the call, there was no neat resolution, no immediate comfort, no returning to the way things were before. There was only the recognition of pain, the acknowledgement of guilt, and the beginning of understanding. Her tears marked the start of a journey towards realizing that love, respect, and gratitude are never optional, and that taking someone for granted can create wounds that no money or ceremony can heal. In that moment, her tears became more than sorrow. They were a mirror reflecting the cost of disregard, and a chance, however delayed, to begin making amends.